Ready, everybody?
Okay.
Ready.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Brouillette, and I am a paranormal murder mystery author. I've written 2 books. I have Secrets in the Shallows, and I also have Devil in the Details. They are a series. I am working on the 3rd book right now, which is Method in the Madness, which will finish out the trilogy. I do plan on doing a spin-off series that will be individual self-contained novels. These are the ones that are, you have to read the 3 in order to know what's going on. So if anybody would like to find me, you can go to my website at www.kimberlybrouillette, BROUILLETTE.com. And you can also find me on Goodreads and on Facebook. So if you have any questions, you can get in touch with me also through Twitter at writeforyou.com. It's WRITERAGHT for you.com, or at Twitter, sorry. So anyway, if you have any questions, just get in touch with me. Thank you. The next person on the list is Michelle.
Oh boy. Hi, I'm Michelle Rabe. I have 2 books out right now in my Morgan Blackstone Vampire series. First one is Cast in Blood, and the second one is Forged in Flame. Yeah, you do have to read them in order, mostly. I'm currently working on my 3rd novel, which, interestingly enough, started out just kind of as a short story that evolved into something else. It's called Dragon's Heart. It's a pure fantasy with some romance thrown in, so always fun. You can find me online at michellerabe.com. That's RABE for the last name. You can also find me on Facebook under author Michelle Rabe. And that's pretty much it.
Katherine, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Katherine Perkins. I'm the author of Foul is Fair, which is a young adult contemporary fantasy drawing on mythology and folklore. I'm also the series editor for the Dawn of Steam series, which is an alternate history emergent steampunk epistolary series. And a lot of my stuff is featured on clockworkdragon.net.
Can they find you on Goodreads or?
Oh yeah, everything's on Goodreads, and that, and both my novels and the charity anthologies I've been involved with. We adapt classic literature like Shakespeare stories to benefit animal shelters in the Pacific Northwest, and all of that is on Goodreads and also on clockworkdragon.net.
There's Kim Cormack. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm the author of the Children of Ankh series, and I don't have a copy of Enlightenment right here with me right now, but the first book, Sweet Sleep South, and it's paranormal fantasy, a little bit of romance, comedy, and quite dark, actually. Dark comedy, yes. And this is the first book, Wild Thing, in a split-off side series about another character, so same universe, yes, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter. There's kimcormack.com. I'm at Kim Cormack on Twitter. And I apologize for my sense of humor on Twitter right now. I'm on author Kim Cormack on Facebook and the Children of Ankh series on Facebook. That's
pretty much it. Now you're the one, you live in Canada, whereas I believe the rest of us all live in the United States, correct? Michelle, where are you at?
I'm currently in Arizona.
Okay. And Katherine, you're up in the upper northwest, right?
No, actually, I'm in Alabama. My writing partner.
I'm sorry.
Quite all right.
Okay.
Everyone gets confused by that because we're, working together and that sort of stuff. But yeah, he's in Seattle. I'm in Mobile.
Okay, sorry. I knew that you had done a lot of stuff with stuff out there, so that confused me. So
totally understandable.
And I'm in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, so I'm on the East Coast. So everyone, we're basically going to have 3 minutes to talk about each one of the questions, and I've got a spare just in case we have some extra time. The first question, why do you think that inner dialogue is an important method to developing your characters? And for the authors, how have you used this in your own books, and give examples. So what I would say, for instance, within my characters, I'll go first. Basically, one of the things that's very significant with my characters is the fact that I don't want you to know who it is. It is a true whodunit mystery. So I'm able to use inner thought to convey a lot of information without revealing who the person is. So it's very beneficial because the murderer can be sitting there thinking about things in their head, what they would like to do, maybe what their ideas are or what their motivations are, and get those things across without actually, revealing anything about their necessarily how they do things. If someone is speaking, for instance, you might get certain ways that they act or ways that they would speak, things like that might give that character away. And by doing inner thought, it kind of prevents that, from, aren't acting it out, they're thinking it. So it makes a big difference. That's one thing I've used tremendously. And it's also a way of, I use it a lot of times to help give, to fill out maybe some information, like with mysteries especially. You want to reveal a lot of like suggestive information where you want the information to be revealed to the reader, but it's not necessarily out there as in you want it to be real super noticeable. You want to be more almost subconscious, almost a subconscious thing rather than somebody doing something blatant. If they acted something out, would be more likely that they would take notice of it, whereas if they're thinking it, it's more like an afterthought kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it makes it a little bit better for the whodunit aspect. I have not had one person guess yet who the murderer is. They might think they guess, but then they get down to the end, they have not guessed it yet. So I feel like because of the inner thought, that has been probably one of the dominant reasons why that has been successful. And so that's just my thoughts. Let's go ahead and talk to Michelle, please.
Okay. For me, inner thought is very important. I come from an acting background. I studied, so a lot of where you come from as an actor is what's my motivation. And even as you're acting out a scene and you're speaking the dialogue, you're thinking, excuse me, a lot of times you have other things going on in your head. So as a writer, I love playing with inner dialogue because I like playing with, the fact that you can be saying one thing, but thinking something completely different.
Yeah.
And it changes how the reader sees the scene. Especially I work in, a limited third person point of view, and I tend to move around in characters. So it's interesting to play a scene from one character's point of view and have what they're thinking. And maybe it's not what they're saying to the other person. So for me, it's a really important tool for character development because it's all about what that character is thinking and feeling and not necessarily what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
For me, I use it a lot in especially my first book, Cast in Blood, because the main character goes through a situation that is just completely beyond, anything that she would expect. She's a vampire and she gets experimented on, and this doctor does some blood experiments and something happens because of them. So now she's basically, after 1,700 years, her life is turned totally upside down. Things she could do, she can't do anymore. Mm. So, it's really interesting to see, for me at least, as a writer, and I hope for the readers, it's interesting to see how she's reacting outwardly with all her, her extended family. And, then how, it's different inside because she's dealing with all this stuff and trying to put up a good front.
And I like the fact that you brought out the multiple point of views too. Point of views can really affect, how a scene is portrayed. If you've got a single point of view, then you have one effect. But in a lot of my books, like you were talking about, I actually use multiple point of views. So I've got a murder scene from three three perspectives, and
Right.
only the things that take place during in that person's perspective are things that they can relate. Katherine.
Well, one thing it's really useful for in terms of inner dialogue is from a health perspective, when you're dealing with a character who has special needs of some sort. In this case, it's my heroine in Foulest Fair has severe ADHD, right? And at different points in the story, you see her when she's being completely over-medicated and, zombied out. You see her when she's actually at a good balance and trying to carefully manage her situation. And then you see her when she's totally off her meds. And at all those different points, she's always trying to function, right? So in terms of talking, it's usually pretty similar. But inside her head, once more, it's completely different in terms of how her focus works and that sort of thing. And it's good to be able to portray that while still showing that she's trying to be functional no matter what, level of, health she's at in terms of her focus and all of that. So that's one way that the inner dialogue really works out.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I wanted to say is that when editing an epistolary series, it was particularly interesting because it's all told in letters, right? So it's mostly everything the guy's saying to other people. But we made sure to include journal entries so that we could include the "I'm scared" and all of the other stuff that he's never going to put in a letter, but it's still important for the reader to know,
Mm-hmm. That's a different way of using dialogue in its own, method. Using letters. I have a few letters that I've used in mine as well, so it's a nice way of adding that perspective. Michelle, have you ever used the letters in yours as well, or?
I haven't gotten to a point where I have used letters at this stage, just because with my vampire series, everything's modern, so it's all I've used texts sometimes, but not really that much. I probably will with the fantasy series, just because there's a lot of backstory that I'm realizing I need to bring in with the second book. So I'm probably going to bring in some more letters and journal entry type things that as, it moves forward.
The other thing I've been able to use the letters for real quick, and then I'll introduce Cormack, is to actually reveal some other aspects, kind of like another testimony, for instance, without bringing out it being the standard, somebody interviewing somebody. In this case, somebody has already died, and they were a witness, and they had written down their witness testimony in a letter to their friend that they saw die. And so it was kind of like after they died, they couldn't talk to anybody, so they talked to their friend through this letter. And so I was able to utilize that. And the nice thing about doing that, I was able to have the spirit reveal where that letter was to his parents, so that, I was able to make it a paranormal scene, and then they find the letter through the paranormal scene. So, so it's kind of neat to be able to incorporate those different aspects. Okay, Kim Cormack, you go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, in mine, it's kind of interesting with inner thought, because in the beginning, in, say, Sweet Sleep, in the beginning of the one series, the character has just really dorky inner thoughts all the time. Like, she's really endearing. That's how you sort of grow to love her. And because in my books, usually I do something really traumatizing right out the gate. So it's like I introduce you to her, and then I get you to know her, and then I off everybody kind of thing. And I realize I've done this in every book. They don't really die, because of course it's paranormal fantasy, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can bring people back if you want. Hey, you can have zombies.
So and sometimes they can hear each other's thoughts in my book. It's just one of their abilities. So it gets kind of funny when people have like weird thoughts, like, oh, like I'm dorky moose right now or something. You're having a ridiculous thought that it's a completely unfiltered and somebody hears it. So it kind of has a different kind of comical aspect in my books, where there's a lot of comedy in the inner thought, because she's very unfiltered. And in the Lexi book, in the newest one that's about a different character. Hers is because she's being so traumatized. Her inner thoughts are always what she's really thinking while she's trying to fit in with everybody else and act like she's normal. So that's how you know that she's not, is what she says and how she's feeling in her head. It's completely different.
Kind of like the way Katherine was talking about with the medicine. Her medicine's making her feel one way, but yet she's trying to, she appears to be going another. So
this is true. Yeah, that's exactly it.
But that's why we're doing this, is to kind of see how we can utilize this. Something else that I thought while y'all were talking, the other thing I've been able to utilize this for is to convey sexual interest, because something where if you have some romance aspect to it, I try to keep mine a PG-13 level, so I don't have any provocative scenes in my stories, but I do convey romance. And so what I'm able to do is kind of like I talked to my my fiance about how guys think. If you've ever done that before, it's really kind of interesting to have a guy's perspective or the opposite sex perspective on how you think about the other person, right? Or say what guys how they are. Well, so I asked him, so would this be something that a guy would think? So, oh yeah, that's exactly what a guy would think. So okay, well that's going in there. So you can express sexual interest without him saying overtly to and out of character, basically disrespectfully to whoever he's interested in. He's keeping in his head, what he's thinking. Of course, he's not saying it, And so the reader knows that this person's interested in the other one. They obviously have the sexual tension, but they're not actually saying anything yet.
You can inform the reader without anybody like sexually harassing anyone.
Exactly. Or like jerks.
It's also great if you have that character that doesn't say things that normal people, quote unquote, would say.
Yeah.
It's great if they think it. I mean, I've got a character named Marcus. He literally has like no filter and on the right. But it's like, can you just think that? He's like, nope, gotta say it. Okay, fine.
In Foul is Fair, we have Aisling, who has the excuse of being a pixie for the reason she runs her mouth all the time. But she is basically an ADHD person off her meds who doesn't hold it back at all.
Marcus is like older than dirt. He was a Roman general, so that's his excuse. Like, I've seen most everything. Forget it. Who cares? Polite? No.
I think the other thing is with Inner Thought, you're able to put a realistic aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think outside when you're living. You don't think you just don't express everything on the outside. You have everything going on the inside, so it gives more of an inner window into the characters that you might not get if you just narrate a story. I get so sick of stories where they are talking from the outside in, and they really aren't getting into those characters. You have no clue what that person's thinking, feeling, anything.
Yeah, expressing everything outwardly does not work for, you can't make every character the crazy pixie or the Roman general.
Right.
Exactly. You do have to have some fairly normal characters and, some real jerks and stuff like that. So.
I have one poor unfortunate human who was supposed to die and he didn't, so now he's kind of hanging out with these guys and a lot of his thoughts are like, what? Wait, no. I didn't expect that.
Okay, anybody have anything else to add before we move on to the next question? Question number 2. What are some unique ways or writing methods to make characters stand out by using dialogue? I think we kind of covered that a little bit, but go ahead and if you can think of some specific maybe writing methods that you've used with regard to your books or books that you've read. It doesn't even have to be your books.
Well, one thing we did in Foul is Fair in terms of the dialogue was a nice contrast between the heroine, Megan, the one with ADHD, who is still trying to be a functional human being kind of thing, whether she's on her medication or off it or anything, and the way she sort of handles what she's saying, in contrast with the crazy, inhuman character of Aisling, who just runs her mouth a mile a minute, and you just type whatever comes into your head, basically, and it'll work as Aisling dialogue, because she's just going to keep on talking. That's And I know some people also, the one thing I've tried to make sure in dialogue is these characters all live in Seattle, right? So I've had to sort of police myself a little for dialectical differences. Because I will start to say, y'all. And then it's like, oh, unfortunately, wonderful though they are, the people of Seattle do not know how to properly use the word y'all. And so you have to make sure
I can agree with you there.
to talk the way the people you're writing would talk, rather than the way you would talk, you know?
I guess for me, tips and tricks, the biggest thing that I do is I tend to walk around and I actually speak the dialogue as I'm writing. So I'm finding myself writing on my phone a lot lately. Weird editing, just so you know, especially if, it auto add has filled in a word that I'm like, wait a minute, what do I mean here? So, but speaking the dialogue, that's the biggest thing, is to sit there and actually say it out loud, because you don't necessarily talk the way you write. If you're just getting started, when I was taking a writing class, our instructor one day at the beginning class said, okay, you're all going out for like 2 hours. It's a 3-hour class. And I want you to go around town and listen to dialogue. Just listen to people talking, find conversations, listen to people talking, and try writing it down. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work, because people don't speak the way we write. Because we write for, a certain amount of coherence and, to move the story forward. But when people are having a conversation, it's really totally different. So, go out, just listen to people talking, and, that's a big thing. And sorry, kind of lost my train of thought here.
No, it's totally understandable.
Yeah.
I get exactly what you mean.
Yeah. The other thing that I do is really try to get into the characters' heads. And if I'm having trouble, I go and I Google the Actors Studio questions. It's actually called the Pivo questionnaire. It's 20 questions that are things like, the one that I remember the most is, when you die and you end up at the pearly gates, what do you want God to say? And it's like, okay. It's other things like, what would your least favorite profession be? And through doing this questionnaire with my characters, making them answer the questions, I found out that I'm giving my poor main character, Morgan, she's going to end up having the job she hates. I'm sorry, you're going to end up having the job and it's going to suck and you're going to hate it, but that's the way the story goes. Sorry.
But it adds to the character.
Awesome.
It does.
It's a real life. Okay, how many people are doing what they enjoy doing?
Exactly.
Most people probably are working in a profession that they are doing it because they have to, not necessarily because they want to.
Right.
And so that's actually more of a realistic circumstance. So that's a good suggestion, is do that kind of 20 questions thing with your characters. And, we're going to be talking in a later panel today about backstory. And that's kind of where that comes in. The other thing, that I used with regard to dialogue is that my sheriff is kind of this uncouth, kind of Carol O'Connor kind of character. And of course, it's this little town. And, he's kind of got, he's the root, he's the main guy of the roost, everybody just kind of follows his lead, right? So he's not necessarily the most couth guy. And so he got him so that he's, a little bit overweight. He stopped talking when he's got his mouth full. So he sits there and he's eating a sandwich. He's talking with his mouth full, things like that. He's kind of this gross-like guy. So my, in the first book, I had a co-author, Karen Vance Hammond. And so I wrote this one section with him eating the sandwich, and he was talking to his secretary or something. And so she thought I'd made all these mistakes. And I had written the thing as if he had his mouth full. And so she called me up. She said, Kim, I think there's all these spelling errors in this one section. I said, no, you're talking with your mouth full like as if he's got sandwich in your mouth. Go to talk to him. Go to talk to him with his mouth full. Go to sound like a certain way. Don't go sound like he would when he didn't have his mouth full. So in the actual words, it looks like you can imagine him chewing his food while he's doing there, sitting there. That is so gross.
Mine are all from different countries.
Oh,
And my characters are, because they're basically like partially mortal teens from different countries. Is backstory, but they so I had to research this proper use of slang, because one of my characters is he was originally from Scotland, and then when he was 12 he ended up in Australia, and then he ended up with Yonk after that, so when he was 16. So he has all the slang he uses that is from both countries. So I had to research the slang, find out if it was current, put it in, like talk to different people and find out what's really being used, like now, versus what, is being used 10 years ago. And if you're just looking on Wikipedia or something or Googling it, you're going to get something that's really old. But different people, younger people that I talked to explained, what's being said now and everything. And so he's got, I don't know, it was neat to kind of step outside of my country and kind of write in the dialogue from the other countries.
Yeah, checking with the actual people is so helpful as opposed to official sources, because the sequel to Foul as Fair is in edits right now, and there's this one case where I looked it up. The place is the George Washington Bridge. It's on all the documents, the George Washington Bridge. I actually talked to the Seattle people, and they're like, no one calls it the George Washington Bridge. And there's like, well, there's two things you could call it. There's the Aurora Bridge, and there's something that isn't fit for a young adult novel. And I was like, okay, the Aurora Bridge it is.
it sounds pretty anyway. It's not as cumbersome.
See, I've got the opposite problem of the slang. I've got 1700 year old vampire. I think my youngest two vampires are 300 and 400 years old. So I can go back and do, kind of the old timey world language. And, Morgan actually teases her husband, Nicholas, about, going old worldy at one point, because she's more modern. He's a little bit more stuck back there, So it's interesting because I can play with, the opposite way of, everybody worrying about slang and everything. I can go back and pull Shakespeare if I want to.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be kind of cool to be able to legitimately do that. Something else that I've run into with regard to dialogue are situations like in courtroom, or I actually, knock on wood, I've never been arrested. But one of my characters was in the scene, in one of the scenes, and so in one of the chapters, and so obviously I had to go through and understand what the process was in order to convey that in the story. So there are certain terminologies. So I would ask people that had been through that experience and ask them, well, what's the terminology that they would use in those situations? What would they call it? Would they call it cell block? Would they call it, what would they call these things? Different things, rather than what we think they would call them or what TV has portrayed them as, because TV doesn't always portray them properly. So, going back and doing that little research again, that goes kind of back to our background story thing that I'll be working on later on the panel. But, that goes in there. The other thing is that I ran into with my books was using the radio, like a radio for police, so what are I actually looked up the call signs for certain things to say, code 3, blah, 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 blah. So what would they say if they were talking to a dispatcher? So those seem like they're little things, but they add to the authenticity of the work if you look like you know what you're doing.
Do you ever think about the stuff that we make up or that we look up on the internet and think that someone at Google thinks we're a serial killer?
Oh, we're on so many watch lists. All writers are on somebody's watch list.
Exactly. Every now and again, I'll type into Google, I'm a writer.
Just in case. Do these things. You just talk about them. You just write about them. I posted one the other day that said, we do these things because it's illegal. To write about them because it's illegal to actually do them.
Yeah, there's a Rex Stout murder mystery where everyone suspects the writer is killing these people because he killed them all in his novels. The detective's like, no, he already killed them.
Exactly.
He's done killing them.
I love that movie, The Knight's Tale, just because it has that quote that, I will eviscerate you in fiction. Anytime someone really pisses me off,
Chaucer.
I think
Chaucer.
that. I will eviscerate you in fiction.
Oh yeah, you're like, I'll kill you in my next book. I'll write you in and I will kill you. It's gonna happen. Great.
Don't piss off the writer.
Something that you said, Michelle, I think can kind of go into the third question. You talked about using the actor ideas and actually going around and now in our third question, since everybody's an author, it's based on your learning experiences. What advice would you give other authors about writing dialogue? Give examples to explain. And so obviously that's a good, example that you mentioned. Let's I guess expound. My main thing as far as would be to actually doing exactly that. I think that is a very good way of utilizing. I'll sit there in my car. I know some people around me think I'm crazy, and I'm sitting there and I'm acting out these scenes, and I'm actually speaking out loud. And I'm sure the people in the next car think I'm totally nuts. And I'll go through these scenes several times, and then by the time I'm ready to sit down and write them, I've already worked through all the kinks in my head. And it flows so much better because I've worked through them beforehand, rather than waiting till I get down and just start writing. It helps tremendously, at least with me. Michelle, why don't you go ahead and any advice you would give?
Ooh, for me, I got to say, I tend to write very kind of as things happen. So any planning or anything like that, I don't know, I can't do it for some crazy reason. So for me, honestly, my scenes tend to start out just as dialogue. And if that works for you, go for it. Because I'll start out with just, literally lines of dialogue with the name afterward, just so I don't lose track of who's speaking. And it's because I come from that acting background. So I tend to hear the talk before I see the scene. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you see the scene before you hear the talk, write it the other way. Go with what works for you. And like I mentioned earlier, go out, listen to people speaking, because there is a certain cadence and a certain way that, people talk. And if you can get that in your writing, do it, because it's awesome. You can tell when writers get it right,
Mm-hmm.
and you can also tell as a reader when they don't. So yeah, just try and keep it as normal or, as real as possible, though don't go for full realism, because like I said earlier, conversations when, you listen to people, even between, like me and my sister, we have a shorthand. I would never try and write because it makes no sense. And, as a reader, they wouldn't be able to follow it as easily. So you're kind of trying to find a balance between realism and making sure that the readers can follow, and then it moves the story forward.
Definitely.
Always make sure your characters have a motivation. That's, I guess, another big thing. Somebody who's just kind of standing in the scene like, hi, I'm here because I'm here. It just doesn't work.
Motivation in the future or for their actions based on their past and their things that have happened to them.
Right. And a motivation can be as simple as, I'm in here to get a sandwich. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering or, I walked into this scene to have a sandwich. One of my characters, her motivation for the whole series is, I'm just trying to get back to my life. My life's upside down. I want to get back to the way it was. And that's what she's trying to do through the whole series. It's as simple as that. And it probably should be simple motivation. I'm trying to, be with the person I love. I'm trying to, those kinds of things. I think a simple, broad motivation makes for a more interesting character because it can change and grow as the character does.
I like the idea. I like that exercise of going out and listening. I call it novel land, where it's kind of similar to like Bubble Land, but it's novel land where we talk like we would think we would talk in a novel, and we don't talk like that. So it's like, hey,
Now, of course, a lot does depend on circumstance. Like, I had a friend who was reading mine. He only writes literary fiction. He only writes complete realism at all times, right? And So he was like, everyone, they're being, you know, a little too, people don't talk like that in an emergency. I was like, yes, but this isn't a real life emergency. This is a young adult fantasy emergency. This is the kind of emergency you have in a comic book. And thus they're going to talk a little bit like they're in a comic book, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the fantasy, there really isn't rules. Like when you sit and think about it, there really is no rules.
Mm-hmm.
You can take this story wherever you would like the story to go. And, you know, certain things, of course, are going to be picked apart by people if you don't do the research on it. But most of the time, you just kind of wing it. You really do. Mm-hmm. And honestly, when it comes to something like all the death scenes for the different kinds of death, because there's like 1,000 ways to die and there's some amount of testing. So I actually did research on this, which is serial killer Google. If you've looked up 1,000 different creative ways to die, and then looked at how long it was going to take you to die, because the scene has to be sort of real, at least a little bit, right? So that people who are, say, in a medical profession aren't going to look at you and go, well, you know.
So Christopher Lee was doing a fantasy, and he explained, Peter, don't tell me how a man sounds when he's been stabbed in the back. I know.
That's right. But so it's one of those things where the research is important. Even if you don't want to do it, even if it sucks, the research is a little bit important for different things. But I go so far off the deep end in the last book in the series that I'd like to think that the readers that came along with me from the beginning saw the progression of the character through the dialogue, through the relationships that they built with everybody else, to the point where they understand when the character all of a sudden is like emotionally empty. Like that, how devastating that would be, because they know how incredible she was from getting to know her to really getting to know her throughout the series. So the dialogue, is so important, because that's how you see how people bond, how you see people meshing. I don't know. It's just brings
real relationship into it, you know?
So one thing that's always, I think, recommended is remembering the geographic, the temporal, and the sociological issues of the character who's talking. Because, it depends where someone lives, when they live, and who they are and what they say. Even in Dawn of Steam, everyone's living in 1815, and, you know, most of them are from the same place. But one is an adult journalist doing full epistolary style for the early 19th century. And later we have some notes from a 10-year-old boy of the lower middle class, and he's going to talk different. You know, because they had words like maybe and really and kind of and all of that in 1815. You just would never use them in your formal epistolary writing. But if you're 10, you do. If you're 10, you're going to write things down just as well as you know, much as you can say them, or worse. And, so that's going to affect your voice and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, we're going to close out with the spear question. Basically, if everybody can, if we can talk about what is your favorite author, why, and how have they influenced your writing in your understanding of books. Finish out basically, Charles Dickens is probably one of my favorites, and it's more than the genius of his actual writing. It's the fact that he was a marketing genius as well when it came to his books, and he actually was the one that developed the cliffhanger. With Pickwick Papers, it was, he basically was able to sell this series of chapters for 2 years on the thinnest of thin paper, and they were able to basically go from one week to the next, and they would have one I think it was every week, and people would come in, and every single week they would bring in, they'd come in and buy those few pages, and then, but the whole thing was that he was able to get them to come back because of the cliffhangers. When the publishers asked him, I could see it maybe working once or twice, but how are you going to get this to happen for, indefinitely? He says, you get to the end of the chapter, and you have this guy who's hanging on to the edge of a cliff, and you have this person walking down the cliff towards the edge, and you don't know if they are friend or foe. And you have to read the next chapter before you will find out if that person is going to help them or going to help them die. And so, that's where he, I felt like a lot of his influence, along with he used a lot of meaning to the words that he used for even character names. Havisham, she's Havisham, and stuff like that. A lot of the words, even the names that he used, were symbolic of the way that the character was supposed to be portrayed. So that kind of gave you a clue as to what that person was like. He also used a lot of things before several authors would do that. And for those that don't know about the Pickwick Papers, basically it was the best-selling book for 2 years in a row. And they get to the end of it, and they have all these chapters, but there's no book. So they go in for the final chapter, and he has this leather-bound, total, complete set of the Pickwick Papers ready for them to buy. And so now he's not only sold them one time, now he's sold them twice. And this time they're paying a lot more. And then he buys back those pages back from the readers, and he rebinds them as a first edition. And when he does that, he puts this extra special, like gold embossing and all this stuff in it. And they buy the same book now 3 times. So he is a marketing genius, not in addition to the fact he was a literary genius. I just, I still am learning things from what he has done, and it's influenced my work tremendously. But anyway, go ahead, Michelle, why don't you go ahead and
Oh, wow. I think writer-wise, I tend to be eclectic. I like everything from Shakespeare to, Stephen King and Anne Rice. I think as influencing my writing, probably Anne Rice, like I said. I tend to write more in her style of vampires, so they're not Twilight, they don't sparkle. Sorry.
don't like sparkly vampires.
They're not sparkly. They don't go around having, romantic relationships every 5 minutes, so they tend to be more normal, for lack of a better way to put it. So, she definitely influenced me as far as, A, vampires, and B, she just has a great style. So I try to emulate that with my own flair and my own twist, but I know I fall short because we always do. I think, writing overall, just every author I've ever read, I learned something from. You learn what to do, you learn what not to do. Because, even though you read for fun, as a writer, you always have kind of that thing in the back of your head that always goes, wait a minute, that didn't work very well. You could have rewritten that line and it would have worked better that way. At least for me, in my opinion. One thing I've noticed lately is a lot of writers using the characters' names a lot. And it's like, okay, you could have just changed that to a he or a she because nobody else has been added to the scene. And it's like, okay, kind of, so it just, every writer you read, I think, kind of influences you to a certain extent.
Michelle Dunn, I don't want to talk over.
Okay,
in terms of writers, I'm pretty eclectic too, but we dedicated Foul is Fair to the late Sir Terry Pratchett for a lot of reasons, but a lot of them that's kind of what we were going for, that combination of the nonsensical and the commonsensical, the silly, but with a certain practicality to it, So they do react to emergencies in an odd way, but it's still a not unbelievable way, And,
Awesome.
I liked the way that Michelle brought out the fact that you learn from people that you don't necessarily like too. I have edited a lot of books, and one of the things that I read a lot was the fact that this one author used she or he at the beginning of every single sentence for like 30 sentences in a row. And it was like, she did, he did, she did, they did, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, and I tried to explain to them that this is just, you need to change it up a little bit. This is just, it's very redundant. And they didn't take the advice, but it is what it is. You lead a horse to water. But okay. And so, Katherine, were you done with your? Okay. Go ahead, Kim. If your spider is not attacking you.
Well, we've already discussed that I am obviously the dorkiest, freaked out person on the panel, but ignore it. And I'm gonna say C.S. Lewis was. I remember I was one of those readers that was Tales of the Fourth Grade, nothing, a lot of Judy Blume and stuff. And then I recall the first time I really became just enthralled with a series was when my fifth grade teacher got us to, we read the C.S. Lewis series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that series, that changed my life in the way that I looked at things. Like, I remember us playing that outside, acting it out with my little friends in the playground, and we all sort of became obsessed with those books at the same time. And even as an adult, someone brings it up, and that is my favorite book.
The Reaper Chief is the greatest.
Love it.
My dad and my sister and I read those like at bedtime when we were kids, and yeah, still definitely one of the ones that I remember. And anytime anybody that mentions it, I'm like, oh yeah.
Or the Charlotte's Web.
I read that in like second grade, and I remember that because the teacher made me and one other kid read it, and we had to look up the words, and actually go to the dictionary, look up the words that we didn't know, and those were our spelling words for the week. So in second grade, I learned how to spell sedentary. And I've known that word since then, and I'm like, I love that word.
Another book that made a really big impact was when I was probably in sixth grade. We had to read Watership Down.
Oh, goodness.
And, that was so different because it was rabbits, and it was personifying these rabbits. And it was kind of a militant thing, too, in some cases. So it was a little different. And so it wasn't what you necessarily would expect from rabbits, because you think of rabbits, you think of these cute little cuddly little animals. But in actuality, they do have that, some of them are a little bit more militant per se, and they, try to make sure everybody stays in line, and, they have certain things that they do. I've actually owned a rabbit, and she was a very dominant female, and she didn't like them. She'd put her foot down. She'd be like, I'm not happy. And it was just, it wasn't always cute and cuddly. Sometimes she was kind of mean, so you get that other perspective, which I thought was kind of neat with that particular book.
And it was the building up there of a whole culture and folklore and language that he was going with.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a very eye-opening kind of experience for me as going into when I was in sixth grade. Because it was a totally different kind of book, than most of the books out there. Well, does anybody we're going to have to start finishing up. If everybody wants to take 1 minute just to kind of say their goodbyes, and I'll go last.
All right.
Michelle, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Oh, well, totally hope everyone enjoyed watching. If I'm always open for questions. So if anyone who watched the panel, either a reader or an author, totally just wants to ask me anything, like I said, Facebook's probably the easiest and fastest way to get a hold of me. So that's author Michelle Rabe, and last name is spelled R-A-B-E. Michelle has 2 L's and 2 E's at the end. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and thank you, Fantasycon for putting it on.
Katherine Perkins. I am also on Facebook with my full name of Katherine Lee Perriet Perkins as my personal account, but I do most of the professional stuff with my partner's author Jeffrey Cook on Facebook, or the stuff through clockworkdragon.net. And I'm also open to discussion with people, and I'm really looking forward to everything else we do in the Fantasycon, and thank you for doing this.
If you'd like to get a hold of me, Facebook is really fast. Author Kim Cormack or Kim Cormack on Facebook. Or it's Kim Cormack for You is what my actual account is, I think. And on Twitter, you can get a hold of me really fast if you direct message me. But if you send me a message on Twitter, it's black hole because there's like 120,000 people on there. So I won't see it if it goes into my messaging there. But yeah, Facebook's definitely best. Fantasycon, thank you so much for putting this on. And yeah, it's so nice to meet you, ladies. It's lovely to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
You can contact me there on Kim Cormack Blogspot and childrenofonk.com and Children of Onk Blogspot. You can contact me there. And yeah, this was lots of fun.
Awesome. I'm glad your ladies have enjoyed this. Hopefully we'll be doing some more of these in the future, and I will keep you in mind when we do. This has been part of the virtual Fantasycon event on Facebook. My name is Kimberly Brouillette, but on Facebook I'm Kimberly Huddle Brouillette, and you should be able to get in touch with me fairly quickly on Facebook and Twitter. If you would like to look at my website, it's www.kimberlybrouillette.com. And you can find my books on Amazon, as well as I believe everyone's books are available on Amazon as well, as book outlets. If you have any questions, feel free to give me an email at info@kimberlybrouillette.com. And I thank everyone for listening to the panels, and I have enjoyed participating. It has been an honor to meet these ladies and work with them through this discussion. Hope to see y'all again soon.